Welcome back to your Feel Good Breakfast Show. It is indeed a Tuesday morning and we are talking all things. Why are you laughing? I don't know. It's just that feel-good kind of energy that you have today. I don't know. I need to set boundaries right here because today we are speaking boundaries. Now, we all have lines in the sand and boundaries that will not be crossed. And this morning, family therapist and registered social worker is here in studio to help us a bit more and join in this conversation. Here she is Kim Abrams. Hello, Mama. Hello. I'm sorry about that. It's Graham. You see, he doesn't set boundaries.
I know. Boundaries are important. You've got to draw a line in the sand. You know, I can laugh because I'm very much going through this phase with my boy now, trying to kind of establish boundaries. Got his first report card from creche and kind of now have a sense of what's working, what's not, and he is at that phase. But it's a difficult line to walk. Why is it so important to have boundaries, and especially at the younger age where there is a tendency to cross lines?
So the first and foremost, when the younger they are, and especially when they're teenagers, they will cross the boundaries. It's kind of just part of their developmental phase. But boundaries are important because, you know, kids need to know what the limits are in order to be safe. So it's not just about discipline. Boundaries is a lot more in depth than that. It's about helping your child to understand what they need to keep themselves safe and what they also need to do to respect others around them. And that also involves developing some empathy for other people. So when kids don't know what's expected of them, they feel really insecure and unsafe. As much as they complain about bedtime and having to eat something at a certain time, they actually need a predictable routine to thrive.
It's not about us, it's actually about them.
Absolutely.
It's so funny because last week we were speaking to Meg about discipline. So I feel like this is kind of hand in hand with that. One thing I struggle with is being that strict person because obviously I'm a single mom. So I want to be like, not your friend, but kind of be like, oh, I'm the cool person, but I also don't want to be like, listen, don't do this. But what are some of the challenges that we do face when implementing these boundaries?
So I think part of it is just going on what you said, a bit of guilt, you know, when you're trying to, you feel like you're being too harsh on your child. But you must remember that boundaries is something you do out of love for your child. This is not just about discipline and being harsh with punitive threats or bribing your child to get to do something. So some of the challenges that can come out is often when a parent wants to be a child's friend over being their parent. And so then the boundaries get really blurred and parents often are also changing the goalpost. So by that I mean, let's say swearing is a no-go in your household, and you know your child gets punished for it, and then you do it, and then your child watches it and listens to it and thinks, okay, well you're contradicting yourself now, and all it does is it just confuses them, and then so that's why parents often struggle, and the challenges become a bit more. You know, they manifest a bit more.
I'm going to spice this up, and I'm not saying all parents should be running around swearing at their kids, but there is adult behaviour and then there is child behaviour as well. So sometimes that line is quite blurred because they've got to also understand that within the set of boundaries is the appropriate behaviour. So as a parent, you are allowed to do certain things. You are allowed to stay up later. You are allowed to... and also we're emotional beings, and I think that's often where where the guilt kicks in for me is I try and maintain something. I'm all great when I'm well rested and I'm in a good mood but now you're exhausted. They've pushed your button for the 10th time and you emotionally react and you're like, oh my word, I'm the worst parent in the world.
A lot of guilt around that.
So what tips do you have for maintaining, because that's the challenge here, is actually setting the boundary. How do you go about doing that?
So one of the most important things you can do is develop a no-go zone with your child or any of your children that you have. So this is a zone where there are rules in place that are non-negotiable. So if it's a teenager, it's curfew time, for example. If it's a 6-year-old, it's bedtime. These are things that won't be compromised on. Now, the minute you install the no-go zone, you have to follow through with a consequence if it's broken. So that's consequences need to be consistent. Otherwise, all it does is confuses your child, and then they think, okay, I can get away with that, and I don't have to do that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I want you to think about what the consequences are. What is applicable punishment? Because ultimately, it is a discipline thing.
Yeah.
And I hate the fact that when sometimes you'll bring in your adults consequences, and you know, but you don't want to feel like you dislike your child or you're being mean to your
Yeah.
child or manipulative. But often when you can't punish, and we can't use physical punishment now,
that's a no-go.
is an absolute no-go. So there's, yeah, I know, and yeah, I come from the old school corporal punishment generation. So for me, that would have been my first go-to. So very, very interesting question. But maybe you can give us some tips on how you create boundaries, healthy boundaries, to protect the safety of your child. Let us know on our social media platforms.
It's my feel-good breakfast show.
Welcome back. Thank you so much for tuning in on this beautiful Tuesday morning. A little bit earlier in the show, our family therapist, registered social worker Kim Abrams, explained the importance of setting boundaries for children within the family unit and offered us some practical advice on how parents can implement healthy boundaries. And we're going to continue that chat right now. So before we move into the shift from children to teenager, where the boundaries have to then change, for a child, what is appropriate punishment or reinforcement, if you will, of those boundaries, do you think?
So the most appropriate thing to do is to take away a privilege that a child has. So that's kind of the easiest way to remember when you're trying to instill consequences. So, you know, if that's TV time, if that's taking away an iPad or cancelling a play date, sometimes you have to level up the consequences depending, you know, on how frequent your child is also crossing the boundary. But you can also, this is about teaching and not primarily just about punishing. So definitely privileges to be taken away, avoiding any type of harsh discipline, so like belittling your child is not going to get you anywhere with your child. You need to have them to respect you, and then it's easier for them to start to master the skills of having boundaries. But you could also try to get your child to reflect their behavior back to themselves. So, you know, if they're shouting at you to give them something, you can say, well, how do you think you can ask me for that toy in a nicer way? Because in this house, when we want to talk to people, we talk to people in a respectful way. And so in that way, you're modeling. So you've always got to be modeling the boundaries that you want to see in your child when you are parenting them.
Now so here's the thing that I want to say is because you're saying things like you speak to them. For us that has a bit like babies, how do you then implement it from such a young age? Because I mean, it's good when they're like at an age where you can be like, listen, Luca, this is what you can't do. This is how you're going to implement it. I can model, talk back to me. But when they're so young, how do you then start it off young and implement boundaries from such a young age?
So from about 1 year old, you know, your child will start to identify with the word no. You know, this is when they are moving around a lot.
Brain is
and so they understand the word no, and that's when you can kind of start putting in boundaries. So when they are touching something they don't need to be touched, it's no. Obviously the consequence to that, it can't be, you know, very extreme because they are still learning and they're exploring. So that's the other balance you need to... Yeah, you really need to navigate. It is about tone. Yeah.
The tone shifts dramatically when we move to the teenage years, and I speak about myself as a teenager, my poor mom. I'm so sorry, Mom. How does that narrative change?
So it changes dramatically because now you want buy-in from your child. So by that I mean they need to be involved in the conversation. So you would still have a no-go zone. So like, I mentioned earlier, have a no-go zone of boundaries that cannot be crossed, whether that's curfew, when they go out with friends, they need to tell you, where they're going, alcohol, driving the car, things like that. So those are your no-go zones that will not be compromised. But when you are sitting down with your teen, it has to be a conversation, because just as you wouldn't negotiate bedtime with a 6-year-old, but you would with a 15-year-old.
Yeah, let them be part of that reasoning process so that they're
absolutely, and they need to understand why you're putting boundaries in place, and your explanation needs to be you're coming from a place of wanting to keep them safe.
The sneaky way would be get them to set the boundaries.
So the softer limits, definitely they can instill with you.
I do want to ask quickly, because we do have to go, but is there something as setting too many boundaries for your kids?
Absolutely. Yeah, we can't be too rigid. You need to start to learn to let certain things go the older that they get, because with responsibility comes freedom, and that's a good thing because then independence comes. So you really want to try to start balancing things as your child becomes older. Your teen would want to talk to you about the limits and boundaries, so engage them in that conversation.
I have a feeling right now there are both parents and teens across the land going,
Yeah.
I told you. So hopefully you have seen or heard something that has sparked the start of that conversation for you, and we have made things a little bit more practical as to how you can start setting those boundaries, whether it's with a young child or with your teenager.